So let's get started. Welcome to Drupal Meetup, which was scheduled for the 7th of March, but the snowstorm hit us really hard. But we're still here, yay! So thank you for joining us. I know everybody is on a tight schedule because we're going to talk about it. Who is going to be at DrupalCon in 2 weeks? Raise your hand. Quite a few. Awesome. So yeah, the room looks a little empty right now because we have people running DrupalCon or like chairing some of the sessions, doing some of the talks. So yeah, we've been busy, but yeah, we got what we got. But welcome. This is a really dedicated group, so let's get started. Housekeeping. Please mute your cell phones and devices. Please use the mic to ask questions, so they will be audible in the recording, which should be picked up a bit better. Restrooms, ladies' room, middle of the stage, right of the hallway to the left, if we exit this way. So it's wrapped down and that way in the hallway. The men's bathrooms just this way to the left of the hallway to the right on this side. And if you want to be gender neutral, you don't really care, then there's also one right outside that's a family restroom, right? So if you guys want to connect to the internet, the Wi-Fi credentials and registration is at the bottom of every slide. So today we only have one mic, but if anybody can just kind of like gather together, remind everybody that can come up to speak if you have a question, so we can be within the camera range, that would be great. So let's go on. The agenda. So right now it's announcement time. It should be no longer than 10 minutes. We start the talks at 6:40 and then closing remarks at 8:35 and then at 8:45. We all go downstairs to after party sponsored by Fastly at the Bill's Bar and Burger. We'll all go there together. Today's talks, we have two fantastic talks today. Just wait for it. We have Michael Hiscock and Nicholas Perus from Lionbridge talking about managing translation and multilingual sites in Drupal. We also have our very own Jacob Rockwoods, who's going to talk to us about what form there's this would have. So stay tuned. It doesn't look like we're all here tonight, but believe it or not, that's how many people behind the scenes, and there's more. This is a non-exhaustive list. Michael was not even on that slide right now. We're going to put you on next time. Michael's like, no. But if you see an organizer, please thank them, because it's a lot of work to gather together. So there we go. Our venue, the food and drinks, are sponsored by NBC Universal. Let's give them a nice hand. Yeah. And our after party is sponsored by Fastly, as I mentioned before. Thank you, Fastly. Photos and hashtag. If you're taking photos right now, please feel free to hashtag Drupal NYC. Our Twitter handle is @Drupal NYC. If you want to share it on Meetup, share it on Twitter, you name it, we have it. So for upcoming events, we have, this is within the North America within this month, with the exception of DrupalCamp NYC. I'll talk about that a little bit in detail. We have Stanford, it's going to be next week for the 6th and 7th. DrupalCon in 2 weeks for a full week from 9 to 13. There's Drupadelphia. I have, let's see, let's check out my cheat sheet. Drupadelphia, I have an excellent person, Anson Han, who got in touch with me on Meetup, and we've posted messages on Meetup. So if you guys are planning to go, and tell him Holdings are fine. And last but not least, we have DrupalCamp NYC, which is in June. We're signed for June, so let's talk about the dates. So. We have moved to June 2018 for DrupalCamp NYC. It was initially taking some time in March this month, but we have to reschedule. The venue, we are still looking for venues. By a show of hands, does anybody here work for a university? Ooh, I would like to talk with you. So hang on. So let's chat after this. So let's see. And then we are going to, we're looking for corporate sponsors. If you know anybody, please get in touch with us. We're on the Slack channel. It's easy to talk to. That's, if you would also like to volunteer, please contact us at Meetup. We also have a channel called Drupal Camp Discuss and on the Drupal NYC Slack channel, so please join us. If you're interested in speaking, does anybody here have something that they have, does anybody have like a new module feature or a new patch they're working on in Drupal? Raise your hand. All right. If not, then does anybody have something that they're dying to talk about? If you're interested in speaking, we would love to hear about it. It can be any length. It can be beginner, advanced, or even non-Drupal. If you're interested, or if you have something that you would like to see being talked about here at this meetup, please go to drupal.nyc/suggest and send us out your suggestion. We do get in touch with people via that venue. So, thank you. The person in this picture is going to be my boss someday. I just wanted you guys to know that. But on that note, may I ask who is hiring? Please raise your hand. We're going to go around. Please state your name and company, etc.
My name is Miguel Rodriguez, and I am the webmaster for Bloomfield College. Right now, I actually just resigned from my position, so my position will be open for anyone who's interested. I actually took a new job at Princeton University. So Bloomfield College is in New Jersey. It's about 15 minutes train ride from there to here. If anyone's interested, please talk to me later.
Thank you very much. And gentleman over here.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Chris. The company I work for is Pixar Core, and we are building a new Drupal team. So we're looking for a senior, very high-level architect, Drupal dev. So if anyone's interested, please let me know. And we are in Midtown, and so that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So people who are looking, please talk to these two gentlemen. Thank you very much. We need to talk to each other. Take a look at your left, take a look to your right, spend 5 minutes, say hi, introduce ourselves to each other, and then we're going to start as soon as the introductions and there's also a happy hour if you guys are not quite done with your conversation. Please feel free to keep going at happy hour. So let's get started.
So he was at.
Our first talk is by Matt. It's called Managing Translation and Multilingual Sites in Drupal. Michael Hiscock is the practice lead for Lionbridge's Drupal integration and has 3 years experience in the localization industry. He collaborates with Lionbridge's global teams and provides connector solutions to prospective clients, allowing them a practical and effective process for website localization. Nicholas Peruz is the product manager for Lionbridge's CMS integrations and has been working in the localization industry for 6 years. His background in web development as SMBIT support provide a breadth of knowledge in the platforms and processes that companies use to deploy and manage websites and applications. Let's give them a warm welcome.
Doing presentation, Mike might help me out with some questions or something later on. Okay, yeah, so, sorry, is there a, should I be using a mic for this? Talking through?
Well, she just left.
Totally forgot.
Oh,
Right
right
here,
in front.
right in front.
Sorry. Perfect. Thank you very much. Yeah, so thank you all for coming. I hope this is something that can be a little bit of use to a few people in the room. So as Ho-Ling mentioned, I work in localization, and I work for a company called Lionbridge. We have a Drupal module, and we do all kinds of translation for different companies around the world into all kinds of languages, and we've developed sort of some software tools and best practices for managing multilingual websites, which I'd like to share with you guys tonight. So first question, is there anybody in the room who manages multilingual websites currently? All right, few people, okay, great. So was anybody surprised at how hard it was to sort of launch and maintain multilingual sites, or how much of a pain in the butt it can be? Okay, great. So hopefully there's a few things we can share with you today. Will make life a little bit easier and you know, provide some help in the long run. So just a little bit of context on some of the problems that we've run into. This is sort of the ideal translation lifecycle when you're managing a project, sort of designing, developing, you produce your content for the site, and then how it's supposed to work is you produce your content, export it, translate it, import it, and launch. That's how everything should work for a nice, simple project. Of course, people who've done multilingual websites will be a little bit more familiar that the reality of the translation life cycle looks a little bit something more like this. The ideal plan tends to go off the rails pretty quickly when you run into reality. So you're going to design and develop your website, but as mistakes get caught, as content needs revision, you're going to have to work through multiple cycles of translation. You're going to be needing some oversight tools. You're going to be just having to manage a lot of different translation batches. The simple idea that you can export, translate, and re-import falls apart pretty quickly. Talking about Drupal specifically, some of the context of sort of managing translations in Drupal, you know, at the best of times, it's a challenging affair. In Drupal 7 specifically, it was a lot more difficult to set up, required a lot of additional supporting modules. Everybody using sort of different sets of modules to manage their content meant that, you know, there was a lot of moving pieces, and some of the more standard ways people were using websites didn't work too well with standard ways people were localizing websites. In Drupal 8, it's been built from the ground up a little bit more with support for localization in some of the core modules. Things are a little bit simpler, but there's still a lot of challenges around. So some of the problems inherent in localizing websites for Drupal 8. Enabling translation is difficult itself. There's pretty simple ways to enable the simplest idea of translation, that you have one piece of content, you want to put a translation for that. That's pretty simple, but beyond that, when you're starting to use complicated structures, custom content types, you run into issues pretty quickly. Oftentimes, you've got sort of one person building the site or maintaining the site, and content managers for the site, who are actually the people needing to do translations, aren't Drupal savvy enough to really work within the common methods of doing things. So it's best to have a tool to sort of enable that a little bit simpler. And as sort of alluded to here as well, the content managers tend to think of things, you know, a website as a series of individual pages. The reality of content being sort of broken up and a little bit structured differently means that, again, your non-savvy people are going to want something simpler that allows them to think about translations in the way they expect them to. And then the default methods of translation also, if you've got a large website or many websites to manage, it's often best to work with an external translation provider, and then you're going to run quickly into issues with how you manage the content on your website with that. If you've got to be copying and pasting content out of your Drupal site into spreadsheets for languages, splitting and merging things apart, importing them back, that's a nightmare for everybody. So some of the different approaches, the solutions for multilingual websites. One of the common ways that people sort of, as they quickly try to do this, run into trouble with having multiple languages stored in the site, is to have multiple independent sites. They just give up and say, screw it, I'll have a French site and a Spanish site and an English site. But, managing multiple different sites, then you're putting a lot of extra work. The default multilingual support in Drupal works pretty well out of the box, but again, if you've got multiple sites, if you've got lots of different content, you're going to be struggling to keep up with the amount of stuff you have to deal with. And the other sort of quick methodology is just exporting files from Drupal. So using content translation, you're able to export things to JSON or XLIF or different formats. But again, you're dealing with a lot of files, you're having to manage a lot of stuff, and you don't have a lot of great oversight into where your translations are they close to done, are we going to hit our launch deadlines? So there's a better solution out there. So our recommended solution that I'd like to talk about a little bit is something called TMGMT, or the Translation Management Tool. This is sort of what we've built a provider module for. There's a couple of screenshots here. So as a company, we have a translation provider module that we built that allows you to send translations through the translation management tool to our company. There are other translation provider modules out there as well that allow you to work with different companies. But what's great about this is that it sort of builds in and gives you a nice interface for managing translations. This sort of gets around all those limitations of having to work with tons of different files, managing multiple translation cycles over time. So you can get a nice sort of overview here in all your translation jobs that are out. What languages are they translated into? Is it in progress? Is it completed? Does it still need to be reviewed? You can get a nice overview. You can get with the translation, with a professional translation provider module like ours, you can get sort of quotes costing for professional translation right within Drupal, send it out, get it back, review it without ever having to use another tool, without having to manage files outside of things, email things back and forth with different translation vendors. You have everything in one place, and it's nice and simple, minimizing the overhead and maximizing the quality you're getting out of things. There's still some additional challenges with this that it doesn't make everything, it's not a perfect silver bullet solution for managing multilingual websites. So some of the other things just to mention that are a little bit complicated still, and some of the best practices around them, are that complex content types still aren't handled perfectly. So that, as I was mentioning before, the idea of thinking about things at a page level, your content managers just want to say, okay, we've got this page on our website, I want to send it out for translation because something changed. This is still not handled perfectly in a lot of cases. If you've got custom content types that are made up of a lot of different entities and entity reference fields and things like that, you often still have to be aware of how that content lives within your site and managing your translation jobs around that. So our recommended best practices there are to keep your custom content types simple, generally sort of 1 or 2 levels of references, and test thoroughly before you're going to launch. We run into this all the time. People come to us, they've developed a site, they've built it, they've got to launch in 2 weeks, and now they want to translate everything. There's not enough time to see how that content is actually going to interact with translation. So engaging with somebody who's going to handle your translations early, making sure that your content is coming out of Drupal correctly and coming back in and not breaking everything, always best practice. One of the other things is page builder block type modules, such as paragraphs and other modules like that, mostly work out of the box as long as you sort of enable those custom translation for those custom content types, but it can be a little bit tricky. So we've had customers who've gone through the work to create additional modules that support translation for those. So when you send a piece of content to translation, it knows which paragraphs are included on that piece of content and sends those out as well. That's not supported out of the box. That has to be sort of built custom. And yeah, so that pretty much covered the other entity reference fields. It all basically works, but there's a lot of sort of testing and configuration that needs to go in no two Drupal sites really are the same, one from the other, in our experience at least. So always when you're standing one of these things up and starting translation, you really want to just factor in a couple weeks at least for testing that the translation process is going to work on top of your general actual translation of the content. So moving on, I just wanted to talk a little bit about a case study, one of our customers that's using Drupal and translation management in a pretty interesting way. So this is a company called the Predicted Index that specializes in cognitive assessments for hiring. And they have an app that they built for this analysis. And what I find really interesting is they're essentially using Drupal mostly for managing their translations and as like a headless CMS. So their actual interface is a mobile app. Their content, where the app stores that content is a completely different database, but they've built essentially something like this, where their software database pushes strings into Drupal as sort of keys. They use this for managing translation because they're using 75 different languages and a lot of content changes from week to week. So this allows them to manage all that content in a pretty simple way. They like using the TM/GMT translation management tool so much that despite the fact that their product isn't actually a Drupal site, they're using Drupal just for managing their content. And they're able, through this setup, to use it. They have a tool called Lingo that they use for seeing their application content in context. And they're able to use an external linguistic services provider to actually accomplish the translations. So with a tool like TM/GMT, with a translation provider module, you can get really a lot of high quality results. And here's just a few benefits after that. They went through the process of implementing this, so I wanted to just sort of highlight a few things that they said. They were able to quickly discover which content still needs to be localized, which allows the development team to focus on developing new features. So this process really sort of pretty low friction for them in terms of managing this amount of content in this many languages. It empowers their translation and translation reviewers to see and review localized content in context. That tends to be very important for a lot of people that are managing sites like this. It cuts out unnecessary steps, and it's reduced their localization time from 6 weeks in the way they were doing it before down to 2 weeks. So they've cut down on that 2/3.
Just to keep in context, it's 7 or 8.
They're using 7, I want to say, Drupal 7. So the review functionality in key management is more or less the same between both. But for these guys, go back a slide. Yeah. So they're actually doing the review through a separate tool called Lingo that they built themselves that allows them to sort of take these translated strings in Drupal and basically see those translations in their app and what they're going to look like. Key management itself also has some review functionality built in, so when the translations come back, you can see, not necessarily, again, sort of in context at that page view, but you can see the formatted content, what it looks like roughly in its own entity. So there's a good functionality around that translation lifecycle. Get the content back, you can see it, you can send it back out for translation. Yeah, so there's a couple helpful things here. Actually, before I get onto that, I just want to mention one thing as well. Just spark the translation lifecycle. So one of the other things that I mentioned that's tough is managing a multilingual website. You often wind up with multiple batches going simultaneously or things that need to be reworked. If you're managing this all yourself in Drupal, exporting things, it gets really hairy. But with the translation provider module, you can build, the different provider modules have different features. We've built some special ones into ours to accommodate that, so you can make changes within Drupal after translation is complete and send those back to your translation provider, so to update what we call the translation memory. So you can get some extra bells and whistles there. You can have your translators do rework and re-deliver those translations into Drupal without having to send a new job, without having to re-export content. So we're trying to really simplify this process, make it really easy for people. And then, yeah, just a couple helpful modules that may interest people who are interested in fiddling around with this a little bit more. So TM/GMT, as I mentioned, is the translation management tool for Drupal. It exists for Drupal 7 and 8, functionality more or less identical between the to that's going to give you the nice translation dashboard, managing everything at a glance. Entity translation for TM/GMT, pretty much essential for any standard Drupal site these days, just to enable translation for entities rather than node-based translations. Professional translation providers for TM/GMT. So Lionbridge, the company we work for, as I mentioned, we have our own translation provider module that allows you to connect to a professional translation service, get quotes within the platform, get translation into basically any language around the world within a matter of days, depending on volume. And then a couple other really useful tools and then sort of further research. SimplyTest.me, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with it, but you can roll out a sort of test instance of Drupal with these tools really simply just to play around with them without having to stand something up on your own server. Drupal8multilingual.org, a great resource just for how Drupal 8 supports multilingual content. And then, yeah, there's linked from Drupal8multilingual.org. There's a Drupal 8 multilingual app, which is basically sort of a follow-along, step-by-step instructions to set up a Drupal 8 multilingual site and run through some exercises. So it's great, useful for anybody who wants to take it out for a spin. And it's actually about it for my presentation. Does anybody have any questions about any of this stuff? Localization, generally, translation.
Have you done like SE? Do we do mics or?
Sorry, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
What's the question?
Yeah.
Pass along, all right.
Okay, so we had some issues with SEO when it comes to translations. Have you dealt with that, and do you have any hints on that? Like, we got things like the Spanish things were ranking instead of the English ones, and you know, everything went messed up.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. That's something we've run into definitely a lot of times. So internationalized SEO with this process. So I think probably the key recommendation is working with somebody who knows how to do internationalized SEO. So there's not a lot of functionality built into these tools for splitting out your SEO content versus your standard translation content. But pretty much TM/GMT itself that sort of facilitates the creation of the structure, the relationship between the languages for all your content is going to handle the basics so that you're not getting your Spanish pages ranking on English search results. That's pretty much going to be handled through a proper setup of TM/GMT. And then in terms of doing the actual SEO work, working with a professional service provider like us, we have people in market in different countries that will do optimization of your content for keywords that are relevant to the local market and things like that. So I think the combination of using the right tools like this for the basic, managing metadata around languages and things like that, that's pretty much taken care of. And then working with somebody who knows just what to optimize for different markets is the other key recommendation. All right. If there's no other questions, we'll leave it at that.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. If anybody wants to talk translation or needs translations, give us a shout afterwards.
So up next we have Webform. There's this guy, our very own Juco Brockwitz is a software architect and consultant who has worked with Drupal for 9 years and is a lead maintainer of the Webform module for Drupal 8. Let's give him a hand.
Any demo stuff, I don't want to be too close to Ridley. Oh, amazing. I also know how to talk really loud, so I'm not that worried about that. This is too small. Sorry guys, I needed an extra second to prepare, but I will get this to work. Okay, I'll start. Hi. Web presentation is web form, there's this for that. Let's start off with my name is Jake Rodwitz. I'm known as Jay Rodwitz on the web. I'm a Drupal developer and software architect, and I built and maintain the web form module for Drupal 8. So this is to start myself off in the right direction, to say what this presentation is not about. And it's to just not trail off and stay focused. And I'll get to the focus point of the presentation, but just I'm not going to go into the history of the web form module, how to install it, the alternatives to it, the future of the web form module, the roadmap. We can talk about that after. I'm not going to go heavily into theming or really managing submissions like data coming in. Because the goal here is to really talk about building awesome forms. And that's the goal of the web form module. And how do you build forms in Drupal? Well, there's the web form module for that. And that's kind of the theme of this whole presentation. So the web form module is a powerful and flexible open source form builder and submission manager for Drupal 8. I kind of like to break it down like this. It provides all the features expected from an enterprise proprietary form builder, combined with the flexibility and openness of Drupal. And you'll see that in this presentation, where you get some benefits when you start working with the Drupal sphere. Things. So also just set some context, this is what we're talking about. This is a web form, this is a contact form. It's almost identical to the contact form that Core ships with, but this is built in the web form module. And this is the web form builder. This is the back-end UI to manage the form, and you can see the elements, text field, text area with a message. And this is a feature I'm going to demo, but you can also see the source code behind the web form, and it's YAML. And the history of this version of the web form module did start out as the YAML form module. And finally, this is a submission. This is the data just coming in. And so the use case for the web form module is that you're going to build a form or copy a template, and then you're going to publish this form on your site as a page note or blog. You're going to collect that data as form submissions. Once that data comes in, you're going to send confirmations and notifications, which is another way to say send emails. And then you're going to review this data online, look at it. And then finally, you're going to distribute this data. Typically in the Drupal 7 version, you would download it as a CSV. But a more common scenario that's happening in the enterprise is posting this data to a CRM, it's called a remote post, and taking that data and pushing it somewhere else. And it really breaks down to these three things. You're going to build the form, you're going to collect the data, and you're going to distribute the data. And I'm going to give you the elevator pitch demo of the web form module. So this is a clean install. I'm going to dismiss these messages to give a little more room. And I'm going to jump over to the contact form that I just showed you. What I like to do is just kind of walk through an example of adding a single input to this, which would be a company. And I'll go over to the builder. Let's add. I'm going to add a text field. This is where the mic is going to be a problem. I think with one hand is. All right. Hopefully it'll autofill. Company. I'm not going to go through any of these options just yet. I'm going to scroll and just add it. You'll see it's added to the bottom form builder. Let's go look at it on this live form. Company. There's kind of a mistake here that I did intentionally where it should be called your company and at the top of the form, right under your name. So you can go into the builder and drag it up and relabel it. What I like to do is also just show you the power of editing the source. And I'm going to have to put the mic down and talk really loud to do this. Or put the mic in my pocket. So you can easily cut and paste your elements. Basically, it's like editing the HTML source, but it's YAML. I'm moving the element up. And what I'm doing, can everyone see? This is important. This is a question you always ask when you show these things. I can zoom in. Okay. Company. And I'm really giving you a very simple example where I'm just moving company up and making it required. So I did a little cut and paste. The real power behind this view is you can edit everything at once. If you're doing labels and descriptions, you can go and tweak it. And if you happen to be a developer like me, it's wonderful because you can just type the form out instead of going and clicking around a lot. Also, if you run into bugs, you can. I use this a lot in the issue queue. We cut and paste this code into issues so you can quickly replicate the problem that someone has. So I'm going to jump over and go to the test tab and show you the form now. And what the test tab does is just fills out the form with just Latin text, and you actually have control over the text. So you can decide what values you want to populate with it. I'm going to do a submission, and it just went through, and it's very simple, so it's just displaying a message. And this is the only area where I'm going to show you how submissions work. And basically, that data came through. I'm going to go over the results, and you can see the results here. You can flag, lock, add notes to it. You can customize this table. You can click through, look at your results. There's also a table view if you have a very long form. This is a very useful view, because if you have like 100 elements, this is, I'm sorry, I got to scroll. This is the way to look at that data very quickly. You can also resend emails. This is a useful tool if you're building really complex emails. Email is just a message, but if you're building really complex emails, you can preview those emails here. Now I'm going to jump back up, and I kind of want to show you just like the real, like, I don't know, the juicy part of this in this quick demo. It's not quick anymore, but so the Webform module supports Flexbox layout, which is a way to do multi-columns in CSS. It's a fully, this is just native CSS. And the idea is that you can start pushing things into containers. So this is a Flexbox container, basically allows for multi-column layout. And I'm going to add that. And just to make it a little more interesting, I'm also going to add a horizontal rule. And for the purpose of this, I'm going to make it a nice dotted rule. I'm going to make it thick. And you have control. So these are just CSS classes that are being added to the HR, and you have full control over in the backend UI to decide what your classes are. So if you were using a Bootstrap-based theme, you might have Bootstrap-specific classes. Just going to move it up here. And now we've got 2 columns with a giant HR, and you can just keep going. Basically, you can wireframe any form that you want, any type of layout you want. So that's the elevator pitch. Now we're going to get into some more detail. So how do you discover what the Webform module can do? Because there's a lot of features here. And there are examples for that. And the Webform module provides examples and demos that can be used as a starting point for building forms and applications. Now, for examples, there's examples of every type of element, an example of a multi-step form, examples of conditional logic and how you might set that up. And there's even examples of just using Flexbox layout to get some more complex layouts. There's also demos, which I'm not going to go heavily into in this presentation, but I'll hint at them while I'm talking, of how to use the Webform module to build an event registration system. And the simple concept is that you have your events and you have a registration form. And how do you, your registration form would be a web form, and how do you attach it to an event and collect data for that event. And I'll come back to it. Application evaluation is kind of a similar concept. You have applications coming in, and then you have a form to evaluate the application. And those modules you just turn on, their features, and you can just kind of walk through the code and see how things are structured. So the example style guide is the key. It's really helpful to understand everything that's possible, all the elements that are there. Also, if you're doing a lot of theming, you can hand off the style guide to your designer to see how your form's going to look, to tweak it and understand everything, how it's going to lay out, and all the little nuances. The example here is you're seeing the error message. So I'm just going to show you that example style guide. It's right here. I will open up and say it's completely overwhelming because it's everything. It's a kitchen sink. So this has multi-step turned on. It shows you the styles here. It shows you the required indicator, which is turned on. But now you start seeing your basic elements. And we're going to start seeing how this evolves, because you've got your checkboxes, you have your inline help tips that you can turn on, your descriptions. But now you start getting into your date inputs. Telephone, you can do international support. HTML editor, file uploads, table selects. Now you get cute, like this is my spot where I pause and say you get cute kitties if you need image selection. And we start getting into widgets, which widgets are just kind of advanced inputs like a rating element or a signature element. Toggles. Likert is really great for questions. And then you also get entity reference, so if you want to reference your nodes or any content in Drupal. And then moving down, there's something called composites, which I'll get to, but basically it's an address element, and it gives you a demo of that. And this is definitely where your designer would want to look at this. This is just how your inputs are styling. What's the spacing, the input heights, the labeling, prefix and suffix, how your containers are working, which is a details element. These are all the HRs that are available out of the box. You can change them. I just picked them up somewhere. And examples of all your inline messages that are available to you. And these are dismissible, and you have to configure it. You can control those. And finally, there's just a quick example of Flexbox. Jumping back up, The only other demo I just want to show you is there's a full demo of how to do a multi-step form. It's just kind of giving you the lay of the land, how you change the labels, how you customize it. I'm going to keep going. And so how do you start building forms? Well, there are templates for that. And templates are forms that can be copied to create new forms. They're like starting points. And I'm going to click through. So templates are just reusable forms. You check off a box and say, use this form as a template. And once you do that, you can make a copy of the template, a duplicate. And it's really important when you do this templating system, you can set up all your default settings, all your behaviors. If you're sending emails, you can set up an email and say it goes to this address. Once they copy that template, that new form is off on its own. You can go make adjustments to that template and it won't impact anything on your site. So this is a web form template, a feedback form, which is kind of very similar to contact form, except it has some radios at the top. I'm just going to quickly show you how to set that up, which is, the web form module has a dedicated web form templates module. You turn it on, and you get a bunch of templates out of the box, and you can delete, edit, and tweak these. You get a preview, and you can just select and copy it. And I'll just show you, now you have a copy of the feedback form. You can do whatever you want with it. I'm going to come back to it, too. So how do you get into really building just awesome forms? Well, there are elements for that. That's kind of what you need to start to understand. So a form is a collection of elements which includes inputs, composites, containers, and pages that are used to collect a submission. And this is the anatomy of a form. So everything's an element in Drupal. Just keep that in mind. Anything you see on a page, just consider an element. Anything displayed on a form is an element, whether it's a details element, a text field, or even the message. Can consider an element. But then you get into inputs, and that's where you collect the data. And text field would be the classic example. And now there's this concept that I'm introducing called composites, and that's just a group of inputs working together to collect a group of values. An address is a great example of a composite because it's made up of a city, state, zip code, and there's a lot of different variations of composites, which I'll show some of them. And then containers are just things that can contain elements. Field sets are a classic one, details is another one. There's also support for sectioning, which is just displaying a title, which is a bunch of elements together, which you can then apply conditional logic to the entire group. And when we talk about building multi-step forms, there's called pages, and pages are containers, but they're used within a multi-step form. And there's just many different types of elements, and there's these categories, which you have, I'm not going to go too heavily into them because I kind of, as we go through, you're going to start to see those patterns. Yeah. What I do want to talk about is just the anatomy of a form element when you start editing it. These are kind of the breakdowns I think you should be aware of as you're looking at all these features, which is a lot of them. Is you've got to define it, which is give it a name. Cardinality means whether it's multiple or how many values it can store. You can also define the default value. And then there's a lot of options for labeling these elements, where you can set a title, description, more text, help text. And then when you get to the input, you can also add some data around that, which is like a prefix and suffix. You could do, for example, if you're collecting currency, you could put $sign before, 2 zeros after. And once you have that input defined, there's a lot of validation. Required is the most common one we're all familiar with. But you can also set an input to have to collect a unique value, or you can put some patterns on it. You can even put word counters on your text areas. And then we get into conditional logic, which is just setting elements to hide and show based on conditions of other elements. And you can also set things to be required and disabled. And the last two are kind of advanced stuff where you can set up access rules for every single element on your web form and decide who can edit that element. And that can be based on the roles of the site, their user permissions, or a specific user can only access one single element or container. And then finally, there's just a lot of advanced options of adding custom attributes to your elements as you're editing them. Custom attributes would include like custom classes to the wrapper around the element. You can even add custom Google tracking tags, like data dash, whatever tracking attribute you want to have. So this is a web form element. I'm going to kind of show you, it just gives you the quick layout of how it works, which is a dialog broken down into tabs. And we kind of hinted at them. You have conditions, advanced, and then access. And this is an example of the conditional logic. Advanced settings. Yeah, this is just going to show you in the advanced settings how you can add custom attributes to a single element, which includes classes, styles, and any custom HTML attribute. So The types of inputs are very similar when you're looking at the categories. You have your text inputs, options. The way to describe that is if you have checkboxes, radios, or select menus, those are considered like option inputs because you're setting a predefined list of options that someone can select. Then we have file uploads, and there's a whole, every type of file type is supported so that you can get certain nuances. With video, you can get, when someone clicks upload, it'll open up the camcorder, not the camcorder, but the video recorder on a phone. Or if you say audio, it'll open up the audio recorder. And the widgets we talked about a little bit, which is just reading, signatures, advanced email multiples, and then entity references, which you could just reference content on your site. Containers, we've gone through most of these. You can just set a basic div as a container and then style it and say, I want to put a panel around it and color it a certain way. Composites, now we're going to start talking about composites where there's linkers, which just allow you to do questions, like groups of questions in a table. And then address, there's definitely variations of address where you can collect a location, which kind of hooks into Google Map API where you can start typing a location, you get all the metadata auto-filled and stored, and then you have a simple address, and contact is just an address with some extra information like the full name of someone. You can also build out links if someone's building a profile, you can collect the title and URL. Names are a good example because I'm starting to see people use it a lot more. I've seen people just, where you just want to, I don't know, the classic one is like you're doing airline tickets and you need to collect all the passengers and want to get the list of, first name, last name, age, and information like that. And there's this feature, which I'm not going to get heavily into, but you can build your own custom composites and define what elements you want to do, what data you want to collect, and how it's going to look and feel. And this is very similar to the style guide, but you can preview all the elements as you're going through and creating your form. So I'll give you a demo of that. I'll use this one. I think that's fine. So when you go to add element in this dialog, click show preview, and it's basically showing you what you see in the style guide, which is just a quick preview of all the elements. And if I said I wanted to add a signature to this form, I go in here, and let's see if it'll fill it out. Actually, the signature element, you want that big block and not much else. So I'm going to just add it. And I'm going to add one other element because I kind of want to show you what, when you install a module, you should experiment with all the features and go through it. I'm going to give you a quick example of that. It's just a text field. I'm going to put the mic down and talk very loud. So you generally want to create an element and then just start experimenting where you just say this is a description just to see how things look. And that's help text. So let's do help. I do not recommend doing all these at once on a live form, but the idea is you want to start to experiment and see what's going on. So that's what I just did is I kind of am messing with the labels around the form, and now we're getting to the form display, and now we can do validation, and you can add custom validation message for all of these, whether it's unique, or if you're doing a pattern, or word count. I'll do the count, do character count. I'll set it to 100. Thousands a lot. I'm going to hit save. Or preview. So this is that signature. It's huge because it's a huge form, but you start to see all the little behaviors you can add to your element. I usually recommend picking one of these depending on where the form is being laid out and how you're using it. I only use more if there's a huge amount of text I need to display. If it's a small little, and the help bubble is really useful if someone keeps coming back to a form, but only the first time they need help. Because it just puts in a little bubble, they use it once, and then they just kind of ignore it as they're going through it. I'm going to go back up. And actually, I'm going to delete these elements so I can keep using the form. Okay. So we built these forms, we have people submitting them, and how do you send email and push this data to a CRM? Well, there's a handler for that. And handlers are used to route submitted data to applications and send email notifications. So web form handlers, this is just like the use cases to think about email. We've talked about pushing data. You can also have handlers subscribe people to mailing lists. There's actually a web form MailChimp module that if you install, it gives you a handler to just take that email address that's coming in and subscribe them to MailChimp. There's also handlers that let you kind of change settings on a submission. The example would be you might want to flag a submission if someone fills out a certain piece of information. If it's a feedback form and they say this is important, you might want to flag that single submission. You can also have handlers conditionally change the confirmation message. Once again, if someone said this is important, you could say something on the confirmation page that kind of addresses that specific value. So this is kind of the handlers that ship with the Webform module. There's an email handler, there's a scheduled email handler, which going back to the event demo is a great, the event registration demo kind of uses a scheduled email because you generally want to send out an email notification right before the event. So when someone registers, you'll send out a confirmation, but then you can also use this handler to schedule an email to go out 2 days before the event that someone's registered. The remote post on the demo, and that's just pushing data. That's just like classic, use guzzle, push the data somewhere. Actions and settings is what you can do to kind of tweak your submissions. You can flag submissions, you can change the confirmation message of the web form. And there is this debug handler, which will just show you the data coming in and out. And every handler has a debug functionality that I built, so that if you have a problem, you can check off the debug box and see what's going on in the background. So I'm going to show you the email handler on this form. I'm going to do not the confirmation, but the notification, because it'll show you one other nuanced feature, which is you can do conditional emails, but there's also this routing mechanism where you can pick an options input, which in this case I picked the type of feedback, and you can route the email going out to different email addresses based on the type of feedback. So you could say, send it to comments@example.com or bug@example.com. And it supports others, so if someone has some other question, you can send it to the general inbox. I've been doing more demo. I think people are very familiar with email, but basically any type, you can set up BCCs and CCs on email. You can also use Twig to fully customize an email. But I want to show you is the remote post handler. I'm going, and I'm going to use this URL for the demo. So what you can do is trigger a remote post to be executed at any point in a submission, whether someone's completed a submission, they've updated. You can even send a remote post when they deleted a submission, so if you want to keep track that they pulled their data out of the system. And by default, you can also add custom data to that. When you do the post, you can add custom keys and information. For all of them, you have the ability to customize it. And then you can check off what data is going. By default, only the form elements are going to be pushed to a CRM. But you can send the submission ID or the change date and all this data. What I do want to do, because I did enter this very awkward URL, is I'm going to turn on debug. And I'm going to hit save. And you can see it gives you a little red flag that tells you you're going to debug. And I'm going to go in and do a test submission, hit send. It's going to fail. So I sent it to CloudFront, which is not happy with me. But what's good is you can see exactly what the data is going out, what the response code is. If you run into issues, you can see what's going on. There's even, there is a demo, an example of a remote post handler where you can take confirmation codes out of your remote server. When they send back a confirmation, you can get the confirmation number and store that in Drupal and track things. I'm going to keep going. So how do you tweak and adjust the behavior or look and feel of your web form? Do I want to embarrass someone? Oh, well, okay, I won't buy it. Sorry. So this is a very important slide. I'm going to show a lot of settings and talk about a lot of settings. The web form module ships with reasonable defaults, but everything is customizable. Another way to put it is you do not have to go in and start tweaking everything. It works. There's like the labels, I took them from Drupal 7. The confirmation message is pretty good. You don't need to tweak it, but you can. And that's really what I'm going to get into is, so you're going to see a massive amount of settings. And I have this slide to try to get you oriented to the information architecture, how these settings are structured. And there's kind of a hierarchy. It took me a while to figure this out. And it's kind of like a poem in some weird way of like, well, you have your general settings, which you define like the title of your form, whether it's a template or not. You also can have your third-party settings. But then you get into your form. How's your form going to work? Does it have a preview page? Is it a multi-set form? Do you have labels associated with it? And once someone's completed that form, they hit submit. You have a submission. And you can customize how submissions work. For example, letting people save a draft. And then finally, the next thing is confirmation messages. You want us to display something after they submitted the form, and you're going to control that. And then we did talk about emails and handlers, and that's like the next step after the confirmation is what do you do? Where do you push this data? And the last two are kind of peripheral stuff, but they're kind of important is you can add custom CSS and JavaScript to your form to tweak little things, like little nuances, like if you have a margin issue, go in and tweak that. JavaScript's there for if you have like ridiculous conditional logic that can't be built in the UI, write a little JavaScript. It's not a bad solution. And then yes, once again, you have full access controls to the form similar to the elements. You can decide who can access what form, who can administer what form. There's even a dedicated setting to say who can test the form. So that you can, I use it because I have certain people that I just need them to use the test app because they don't want to fill out these long forms. I turn it on for those individuals. And this is a very quick walkthrough of kind of half the settings in each one of these tabs, but you can customize the URL that's being generated for each web form. The back-end system calls them web form /name, but URL alias is form/contact, and you can change that and alter that. You can also turn on AJAX support for the form, so it just is AJAXified completely and stays on one page. And then if you do third-party settings, which I'm going to come back to, and I emphasize spam a lot, probably say it 3 times in this presentation. But if you turn on the honeypot module, you can go configure your honeypot setting per form and decide which forms have honeypot or which don't. Jump ahead. So with form settings, very similar to the event registration demo is you can set open and close dates for your form so you can limit your registration window. Every label is customizable. You can also set up forms to be pre-populated via the query string. You can customize your multi-step form and previews. And I can jump ahead here because I'm basically similar stuff, except submission limits. I think people are always interested in that, is you can set submission limits to your web forms based on a whole bunch of things, per user, per form, per node. There's also an autofill feature that was recently added where it'll just take the last submission that someone filled in and pre-populate. So you can pick which elements you want pre-populated. Confirmation message, every possible type of confirmation you could think of is supported. The example would be if you're using the AJAX form, you're going to want to do a modal confirmation. So it just pops up a little window and they can close it. And we talked about the JavaScript and CSS. I use it, for exactly these font sizes, types for specific forms. I'm going to have some request. If you have table layouts, you might want to tweak your table columns a little bit. Access controls, I got to. I'm going to just jump through some of the settings. And back. I think one important thing is there's an expand all class. So this might change over time, but this is a good way to get a quick lay of the land of scrolling through, and this is where you can turn on your honeypot. Forms. Spend some time in this area of the form behaviors, because these are all little nuances you can add to your form. If you're doing anything with accessibility, you kind of have to turn off client-side validation. HTML5 client-side validation, I just discovered this recently, is broken. In JAWS, you go and click on a field that's required, and it says input invalid when someone's about to type it out. This is the default behavior. The browsers didn't get this right. There's no real workaround. And I want to just, one thing I want to say, every label is customizable. But there's a default label, and you don't have to do anything. And you can customize the default label that's applied to all your forms under configuration. Confirmation, just going to, same thing, very easy to kind of tweak that. CSS and JavaScript, I just want to throw out there is you're just typing in the CSS and JavaScript. And this can turn on and off for different users. So, yeah, coming back to this question, should you customize everything or should you customize nothing? Well, here's some tips. Know what's possible. Walk through the settings, be familiar, ask some initial questions, can I change these messages? And you'll find out what's impossible too. There might be some things that just aren't available in the UI. And just keep it simple, especially when you start out. For developers, I think it's important to say you can write hooks to define your default settings so that your forms, when they're getting created, are working a certain way. Or, and you can use templates to also define default settings because when someone copies a template, all those defaults are copied over. So now we're getting into a bigger one, is how do you change the global and default settings? And there's configuration for that. And that's something I've been distinguishing in the web form module. When you get to the web form settings, when you're adjusting things that go throughout the entire site, it's configuration. And configuration just defines the default features, functionality, behaviors available to all forms on your site. Web forms, to be more specific. And this is where this slide is really important. These are things you should always configure. Private file access is just like a requirement for Drupal sites now. Someone's uploading files, it needs to go to a private file space so that it doesn't get access from anonymous users. And there's PSAs that are even linked to as you're configuring it to tell you you have to do this. Always install spam protection if you have forms on your site. You know, CAPTCHA, honeypot, antibot are the three that come to mind. There's a lot of elements. I think you guys have seen this. There's just a ton of elements available. You should turn off the elements you don't need. If you don't want people uploading files, turn it off. I do it for every project I'm on. I go through the elements and see what the client needs, and I pull them out. Occasionally, you're going to need to add some API keys. And I think it's very important to look at the reusable options that the web form module ships as default and see if they make sense. Delete the ones you don't need, alter the ones that you do. And configuration system where you have your forms that contain elements that have options, and then we're getting into your submissions, and then handlers is that how emails and your data is processed, and exporters is, we didn't really get into it, but if you're downloading a CSV, that's called an exporter. You can control how that's going to work and set the defaults. Another big thing is you're seeing a lot of functionality as I'm showing these elements, and these are all handled by third-party libraries. So you can turn on and off the third-party libraries that you are using in the module. And then under advanced settings, you can turn off features that you don't like. If you don't like modal dialogues, you can turn them off. If you don't like the sidebar, you can turn that off. If you don't like the promotions, you can turn that off. You can even go change the test data. I'm going to demo 3 things. It's just the managing the elements to turn them off, what options are, because I think people just don't fully get it, and it's important to see what's going on, and then libraries. And so the way to get to configuration is you just jump up to the name and go over to the configuration tab. And elements, so you can define your defaults, like these are the classes that you use to wrap your elements. The one that I want everyone to be going to is the list of elements down here to turn them off, on and off. And by default, the web form module does ship with support for the password element, but it's off because it's not a good idea, because the data coming in is stored as plain text. It's not encrypted. So we've turned it off. If you're using a CRM and you want to collect the password, I see no reason why you shouldn't have the availability of a password element. So that's why it's here. You can turn it on. And that's just one of many examples. Options. It's, select menus are great. You have a list of states. This is just a way to get reusable options to find for your forms, and it ships with a list of states. You can go in and customize state code, state name. And you can customize all of these options here. And I think what's important to emphasize is you can get into the YAML source behind it. And this is very easy to quickly customize, import, and edit. We even, sorry to jump one up to me. Even get to customize the little kitties if you need to upload your images and decide how that's going to work. The final thing is libraries. So these are directions on how to install the libraries of the web form module. You should read them. You can use drush commands and composer commands to get all these libraries quickly installed. You can also turn on and off libraries depending on your preferences, and then if you run those commands, you will get these libraries. The example that I like to show is that web form module supports select to and chosen. They're both ways to make multiple select elements work a little nicer. You don't want both on. You want to pick one or the other. Select to seems to be the preferred one in Drupal 8, so I kind of leave that on by default, but you can turn on the chosen library. So the takeaway here is there's a configuration for that. Anything you want to tweak, there should be some way to do it. And what if you can't configure something via the user interface? Well, this is the Drupalism. There's a module, hook, or template for that. That's my experience in building these forms. You can get in there and tweak almost anything. So, how am I on time? Oh, relatively okay. Okay. So how do you place a web form on the site? I'm going to speed it up a little bit, but not too much. I'm getting tired. Well, there's web form blocks for that. I hope everyone's familiar with blocks. It's just a little element you place on your site. And blocks just make it easier to include a web form in layouts, panels. They allow just a web form to place anywhere on a page, or you can also say which page these blocks are placed on your site. And they just can go anywhere. And the demo is kind of simple because I can jump up, structure, block layout, and I put the contact form that we were starting out with in the sidebar. Or here, we'll do the feedback. Oh, I always make this mistake, I jump ahead too far. You got to add the web form first, and then say feedback. Add the feedback. And you can also pass default data into this form, and that's another way to kind of tweak how a form's going to work. You can say, in this instance, I want the hidden value to be contact form all over the place, or here's the event dates, or the registration, additional registration information. Because as a block, you get all those contextual filters, where you can even say where this appears and what web, you can even attach this block to a web form. I'm going to just add this to every page on the site, and what I think is important, actually, I'm going to make my demo a little easier for myself. I'm going to switch this to the contact, because what happens is, so in my first demo, I submitted the contact form once. But if I go over and go to the site, you're going to see it's added to every page. Now it's added to the feedback, but let's go up to the home page. So here it is. I'm going to fill it out. I'm on the home page. I want to emphasize that. I hit send. Now I'm going to click through to a node. Okay. And these quick links are really useful for jumping to seeing your results. So I've submitted the form like 3 places throughout the site, and this gives me an opportunity to show you some interesting tracking stuff that's happening there. Web forms track where they're being submitted from. So it tracked which node I just submitted it from on the site. So if someone went to another node and they submitted it from there, you're going to know where they submitted. It kind of makes these forms start acting like comments because people are adding little pieces of information throughout your site as you're navigating through. And this is where you start getting into how do you get a fully integrated web form node into your site, and there are nodes for that. And web form nodes are just nodes with a web form field attached to it. There's an entity reference. And there's a web form node module. When you turn it on, it provides a web form content type, which just has the field. But any content type can have a web form attached to it, like an event. When you turn on that, when you make that a relationship and attach that web form to the node, you get 2 tabs. You get a test tab and a results tab. And what that allows you to do is quickly test that form for that specific node, and the results tab lets you see the submissions only to that node. And another feature is every web form gets a references tab added to it. And what that does is it makes it easy for you to track all your instances of that web form and quickly add new instances. And this is the field UI. This is just a web form field. And yes, these fields can be added to paragraphs. Some quick tips and tricks before I get into just demoing it is tokens are extremely useful because you can have a web form attached to a node and use tokens to pull data off that node into your web form. It's called entity reference chaining. So this is an instance where the web form submission is looking at the node that the submission is coming from and pulling in a field confirmation message, which you could then pass to the confirmation page and start customizing it that way. Another tip is I didn't demo it, but there are computed elements, which is just an element that just displays information based on tokens, or it can be even a twig template, and you can take that data out of your node and display it anywhere on the web form. Tokens are incredibly useful. Spend some time with them. There's a lot. Any piece of data you need to pull is supported by tokens in the web form module. And for building nodes, actually this demo gets even easier for me because of this references tab. So right now I have no instances of this contact form on the site. If I click add web form, it just quickly passes in the web form ID. It actually pulls the title, and by the way, you can write hooks to even get more advanced, but it just pulls the title of the web form, it auto-populates the relationship. You do get some default settings, which basically opening and closing seems really important for web form nodes, and you can pass in default data into it. And then finally, you can hit publish. And now I have that contact form on my site. And for the demo, what I'm going to do quickly is turn this off, because I don't want to have 2 forms on the same page. It gets a little weird. But we have this test tab. I've submitted it once. I'll do it one more time. So you see it starts tracking the submissions only for this node. This is exactly what the event registration system works, because you have an event, attach registration, you get all your registrants, they go, they're all happy, they download them, and you can even go to a master view and look at all the registrations coming in for historical data. Okay, we're getting to the end of this, where just how do you extend the web form module? Well, there are add-ons for that. And add-ons are just Drupal modules and projects that extend and provide additional functionality to the web form module and form API. It's kind of important nuance to say that the web form module is completely built off of form API. So if there's a module that enhances form API, it's usually available to the web form module. And there's just a lot of useful add-ons available, and there's just more to come. And just to kind of lay the land of the breakdown of it, spam protection, that's the 3rd time. That's a key add-on. There's some helpful things for validation, like client-side validation. You can get new elements. Integrations is a big one, which is that MailChimp module. REST API, there's a web form migrate module. I'm actually going to call out kind of my top 3 in for user experience. Honeypot and captures, that's the client, that's for spam. And then at the end, client-side validation is just a really nice module because you turn it on and it makes the experience a little better. And it fixes most of the HTML5 accessibility issues in a nice way. It's definitely worth installing and turning on and just looking at it. For site builders, IMC is really important if you're dealing with people. If you want to add files and images to your form or your emails, you need to use IMC so you can get these files on your server and manage, especially if you're using the image select element, you need IMC. And web form views analysis is just helpful if you need to generate custom reports of submissions. You got to use the web form views module. And the analysis module just generates beautiful pie charts for your submissions. And I haven't looked at it in a while, but he was doing really cool stuff where they were blocks. So you can kind of like build your own dashboard for a web form and pick out which element you want. It was really cool. So for developers, yes, there's a web form migrate module. It needs some help. It needs some love. If you're coming from D7 to D8, you should use that module and contribute something back. The web form composite tools allows you to define reusable composite elements. If you're building really complex forms, this is very similar to how the options look. You can go into this place and say, here's my address element, and this is exactly how it's going to look, and then you can keep placing it on all your forms on the site. The Maillog is just an awesome developer tool, because if you're doing any email, if you're testing your emails, you install this module, and it captures them before they're sent out, and it prevents you from spamming people. So the web form module, like, this is just an important statement about how I feel about it, is, without Drupal, it's just another form builder. It really is. It's just another enterprise form builder out there that looks kind of cool, build a couple of elements. The reality is, once you get into, with Drupal's contributed modules and things, it's like an entirely different ballgame, because people are going to extend this and build amazing systems and integrations. I mean, I'll pause for a second. I saw this demo that blew my mind, because these guys are doing, called Maestro, and they're experimenting with a business workflow tool. Just to emphasize, a business workflow is totally different than like content moderation, where you have a node, you say you draft, someone reviews it, and they publish it. It's a very simple use case. Their use case is business workflows, which is like massive flow charts where data comes in, like their demo was an insurance request system. So or quote system. Someone fills out a quote, it comes in, their module, and that's a web form, but then their module takes that quote and sends it to underwriters who then respond and they get feedback, and then the person comes back to these quotes and picks one. And this was their basic demo. But it just shows you, like, I've never even seen anything like this in open source, like this level of flexibility. I'm really curious, and they're releasing it in the next couple of weeks. I think actually next week. So this is, I guess I emphasize, the power behind this whole module, it's a Drupal community. It's the community's ability to provide contributor modules, and really it's web form module extends core, so it's what's going on in core has made this module possible. And I mean, this is Drupal, this is the community that's building these tools. That's me in the far corner. And this is my pitch that some people know I do now. It's not should, but how can you contribute back to the Drupal community? And that's a good question. How can you contribute to the web form module in Drupal? Well, there's a contribute section for that. And the contribute section of this module, I mean, I broke it down to 3 things in my mind. You should join the community. Everyone should have a user account on Drupal.org. If you want my help, create a user account, because then you can file an issue. I personally think everyone should be a member of the Drupal Association. I take it as a no-brainer. It's about contributing a little something back to the infrastructure that supports Drupal, and this module wouldn't exist without the Drupal Association running the CI and test bots. And for individuals, it's $15 a year. And the one that blows my mind is organizations, it's $200 a year, and you've got people doing $100,000 websites, and I'll see them do a case study and say how amazing their project is, and then they're not a member of the Drupal Association. It's kind of a mind, and I've been blogging about it. I think it's kind of the fault of the community to not tell these people that they should join, because I did it with Sloan Kettering. I walked in and said, you guys should join. I'm like, sure. If you do it early enough, it's not a big deal. And then you should get involved and get familiar with the, what's available. And the contribute section just tries to help push people in this way and get them started. And I'll just demo it really quickly because it's not a big deal. And by the way, this is only for admins when they come in, for people who are web form administrators. And it just breaks down these 3 pillars to just kind of push people to understand what the community is, understand what the DA is. And I'm trying to experiment with this interactivity where it just kind of pushes you to create that account a little bit. And I'll use my account. And it gets this information. Just kind of says, hey, you contributed something. And it picks up your association membership and if you have any contributions on your user profile. And my little flag guy just is missing here. This is a bummer. I don't know. Oh, it's a Drupal icon. Okay, that's the only bug in this presentation. That's not so bad, but kind of stupid. Wow, I'll fix that tonight. That's the worst. Well, yeah, I'm just gonna make that pitch. It's a. I don't even want to be. I'll say very personally. I don't want to be making that pitch anymore. I think that should just be a given straight out of the gates. It should just happen. When you're in a client pitch meeting and you're talking about Drupal and say, hey, there's an association, everyone joins it, everyone participates. And a lot of ways, I think with clients, if you get them to open their wallet that early on, it changes the whole relationship. So wrapping it up, where can you get some more help and learn more? Well, there's more information about me. jrockwitz.com is my blog. My profile is on Drupal.org, and you can catch me on Twitter posting, basically tweeting blog posts most of the time. For the web form module, there's documentation on Drupal.org. Drupal Stack Exchange is just amazing. I think that's like the best resource for asking your questions and getting feedback. I personally follow it and respond as best as I can. If you run into an issue, go to the issue queue. For the community, emphasize the Drupal Association again. I strongly recommend subscribing to Drupal Planet for the blog so you know exactly what's going on. And the newsletter is also a good recap of the blog posts and other things and module releases. And are we done here? Yes, and Ralph says so. Okay, questions? Okay, but I want to emphasize, that's a 14-year-old dog that looks like a puppy. and I just want to say, he's got this thing here is a giant basketball fat deposit. And he lives perfectly fine with it for years, and he's been happy about it, and doesn't care. Okay, so, questions? Cool. Thank you.
Will these slides be available?
Actually, you want to? I'm going to show you another feature that I added in the last week. It's not in the latest RC, but it's going to be in the next one. And the feature is that you can go over to the help section. Okay, the two features. As you navigate through the module, there are videos to help you. If you run into an issue, I had someone who was really kind of awesome because I worked with her, and she's like, I didn't understand how templates work. So she said, I clicked on watch video, and I figured it out because she didn't understand the checkbox.
This week has been a walkthrough.
So these are all the videos with resources. This is all recently in the last week. It's like there's links to get more information about each one of these sections. And for this presentation, because you said you weren't, like recording it was going to be an issue and I wanted to practice, if you go over to the help section, and this is only on my local version, the dev version has the video now, but at the bottom is this full presentation with the slides. So you can get that. And I'm doing it at DrupalCon, so there'll be another recording. That's it. Cool, thank you.
Let's thank our speakers again. The talks were fantastic. I'm going back and reviewing the video. They locked out our computer. Anyway, so our next meetup is slanted for the endnotes. That helps. This is why we have it on paper. It's Wednesday, May 2nd, so stay tuned. We're going to post it on Twitter saying save the date. The next meetup is going to be May 2nd. And our after party as a Bill's Bar and Grill downstairs. We can all go together. So you don't need to go home, but you cannot stay here. Let's go to the bar.